All right, so in this video, we're going to kind of do some more with using the document object model, how it relates to event handlers like mouse press or keyboard press. So, you remember we had things like function key pressed or function mouse press or things like that. So currently the way it's set up is if someone presses their mouse, that's going to create or cause this function that's going to make a p tag with the text key was pressed inside of it. My mouse is pretty much the same thing, where if I click my mouse, it should make a p tag with mouse was pressed inside of it. So let's try that out. Um, so if I preview this, currently there's nothing because I haven't done anything with my mouse, but if I click with my mouse, mouse was pressed, mouse was pressed, mouse was pressed. I hit key on my keyboard, key was pressed, key was pressed, mouse was pressed, mouse was pressed, key was pressed. Okay. So my point here is that we can use, anything that we've talked about, you can do that. Okay. You can utilize this when it comes to events and things like that. All right, here's what we're going to do. If you remember from our events lab, we have mouse X and mouse Y, which is the current horizontal and or vertical position of our mouse, right? And we can calculate that every single frame inside of draw. And what's going on here is I have an if statement. And what it says here is if mouse X is more than 800, meaning the Y value, or sorry, the X value, then you're going to say you are on the right side of the document. So in other words, if mouse, it's because this is because this is in draw, it's going to get calculated every single frame. And if my mouse is on the left, it's going to be, X equals 0 or 10 or 100 or 200 or whatever. And so this won't run. But if it gets higher than 800, which means 800 pixels, really, this is going to run, which would mean, you're on the right side of the, canvas. So let's try that out. All right, I'm going to refresh. So currently I'm over here, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. And then there you go. Now it keeps happening because it happens every frame that I happen to be past 800. So if you keep it over here, it's just going to keep doing it for a while. See how that's growing, and I can stop it. All right. All right. Let's talk about adding an event handler to something. Okay. So we're going to combine some things here. Okay. We are going to have a variable, and there's actually an event in, or sorry, there's a method or a function inside, which also happens to be an event, and it's called MouseClicked. And what it lets you do is if someone were to click on an item, it will let you run a function. Okay. So what does that mean? We're going to combine a couple things here. I have a button. Okay. It's just made with HTML. It's just an HTML button. And I put an ID of button on. And it looks like this. All right. The first thing I want to do is I want to be able to, we want to select that button so that we can add code to it. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to make a variable called button. And then what I'm going to do is we are going to select that button using the select function that we just talked about. So if I say button equals select button, that's going to take the button variable that I created and stick all of this inside of it. Okay. Then what's going to happen is I've made my own function. If you don't remember how to make your own function, go back to last week's videos about this. I made my own function called button pressed. And what I'm saying is when someone does this, let's just print to the console button was pressed. Okay. Now, what's going to happen is I can take the button. I'm going to use the button variable, and we're going to use mouse pressed, which means if someone were to click on the button, you can run the following function, which is this, and I'm going to say button pressed. Okay, I know this was a lot, but hopefully you're kind of seeing what's happening here, where it's like, I have this element, we're running a function, which is really an event, or a method, which is really an event. And when it runs an existing function that I have. I have this function, and what it's saying is, all it's going to do is print the console. Okay, so let's try this out. I'm going to go back. And if I refresh, and if I click on this, button was clicked. Okay. So, once again, how could we do this? Well, I could say let count equals 0. And every time, I don't know, let's say count equals count plus 1, print count. So this is going to print the value of count every time I press on the button. So let's save. Okay, every time I click, it adds 1 to the console. Maybe instead of it printing to the console, let's make some text that does this. So what if I created a p tag, create p, that said, you have clicked the button, then we'll do count number of times. Okay. So, what's going to happen is, okay, we build this. This gets selected from here. We then say, if someone clicks on it, run this function. This function then basically has a counter that's adding 1 to it. And it's saying every time you click on it, why don't we make a p tag that says you have clicked on it X number of times, and then the X is substituted by count. Okay. Hopefully this kind of makes sense. Okay. I'd probably add a little space there. There you go. Okay. Maybe I want to click on the button and it's going to add a color, or something's going to happen, like it adds a CSS to something. So what if I did this? Let's, instead of counting how many times, so I don't even need this anymore. Why don't we say, okay, we already have that function, or that variable button. Let's run the add class, and I'm going to say, I'm just going to call it background. And let's make a CSS, I'm just going to make a CSS class called background. Oops, not script, but style. There you go. And let's make it yellow. Okay. So in other words, what's going to happen is it's going to wait till I click on the mouse, and then in this function, it's going to add this background color of yellow to it. So if I refresh, nothing happens. Then I click on this, and then it turns yellow. Okay. So you can see how, once again, we could kind of do this to make some interesting things. We could have little buttons, and every time we click, something happens. I think actually that's what happened here. It's kind of the same idea. I have a variable called button. Okay. And oops. Sometimes people put the script at the bottom here. It probably would work without it, but we'll keep it here. All right, so I have this button, and it's selecting this ID of, it's selecting this element that's already in my page with an ID of button. Okay. So I have a button variable, and then it's selecting this button ID and putting its HTML element inside. Okay. That's step 1. Then what I'm doing is I'm also making another variable called body, and I'm actually going to put the body of this page If you can see, I added an ID of body to this. We're going to make that also an element. Okay. So there's a body there's a variable called body that represents the body tag, my HTML, and there's a variable called button, which represents my button tag. Okay. I probably should have called it something else, so it makes it a little less confusing, but just roll with me here. Now what I want to do is I have a function where I've created a function called add background. And when this runs, it's going to take the body tag and it's going to add a specific CSS class of red background. And you can see that I actually already have this CSS already set. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, so button is my variable. We're going to add that method of, mouse pressed. So that's the method of what's going to happen. It's when you click on your mouse, what should happen? Well, I wanted to run this particular function. So I could say add background. So my point here is in the last example, we added the CSS to the element that we clicked on, right? So in other words, like if I come back, it's like we added, you can look at the element. We had a button and then we added some CSS to it, right? By clicking on it. What we're actually going to be doing in this next one is we're not going to affect the button that we use, but actually a different element, right? We're using the button to affect something else. In this case, the body. So I'm going to save. And when I click on this, let's look at the elements here. Watch what happens to this. See how that added that? So my point here is I'm using buttons to affect something else. Okay. So, just as an example, what if I wanted that button not to change the background color, but I wanted it to add a border around something? So what if I had, I don't know, I'm just going to add some text here. So I'm going to add like a div and let's give it I'm just going to put some dummy text in it. Don't worry about how I'm doing this. And I'm just going to call this like, I don't know, paragraph, right? And what I'm going to do is let's make a variable, my paragraph. And it's going to hold that ID, that whole element. So my paragraph equals select paragraph. All right. And what I'm going to do is say, okay, when someone presses the button, let's take my paragraph and we're going to add a class. Now, I don't actually have a class yet, border one. I'll just make one called border. And we'll set it to border, 2 pixels solid orange or something like that. And I'm going to add a class of border. And when I come back and let's refresh, what should happen is I have this div with an ID on it. When I click on this button, it's going to select this element and apply that border CSS to it. And there you go. Okay. So you can see how this could really do some interesting things. All right, I'll do one more. Now, on the last one, the mouse click, you literally, wait for it, had to click your mouse, right? In this case, it's we can have another, in addition to mouse click, we also have mouse over. And what mouse over is basically like a hover. So rather than actually having to click, we can run a function just by hovering over something. Okay. So what's going to happen here is I have in my body, I have this p tag and I have an ID of paragraph on it. Okay. And I made a variable called my paragraph and I set it equal to this. Okay. And then what I can do is I have another function called test type, and it's going to say your mouse is over the p tags. Okay, so it's not going to change anything. It's just going to put this in the console. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say my paragraph dot mouse over. So this is an event, or this is a method that's also an event that's of this. And I can say, okay, when this happens, run this function, test text. Okay. I'm going to save and let's go and let's preview this. So if we come into console, nothing's happening because I'm not over the text. But when I get over the text, you can see that that happened. Okay. Notice that I didn't have to click on anything. It's a mouse over. And in this case, because this is a block tag, remember blocks take up the entire container. Even if I'm over here, that still counts because it's considered the whole area. Now, why I might want to, I can use this to change things. So since I have my paragraph, I could say something like my paragraph add class, and maybe I'll make the text, I'll make a CSS. I guess I already did it. I'm going to add a blue background here to my text. So blue background. Yep. All right. So if I come into here, nothing's happening because I haven't done a hover yet. But when I come here, it adds that. Okay. And maybe I even want to change the text. So in addition to adding this, how about I say my paragraph .html text was hovered over. Hovered just one, there we go, over. Okay. And if I go back and refresh, it should add that CSS class and it's going to change the content. Okay, text was hovered over. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how we can use events and even built-in event handlers of the HTML5 element object to be able to edit things. I can take anything. It can be a button, but it can also just be like a paragraph or an image or anything. So I can change anything I want using that JavaScript. Okay.